United Press Limited. I, Shravanti, welcome you to the online publication ceremony of Millennial Generation in Bangladesh, Their Life Strategies, Movement and Identity Politics, edited by Kazuyo Minamide. This book is about the young generation born in the 1990s, 20 years after the Bangladesh independence in 1971. The contributors in this book discuss life strategies, social movements, and identity politics of contemporary Bangladeshi youth, particularly in the urban context. For today's ceremony, the panel shall consist of the following discussants: Tariq Omar Ali, Associate Professor at Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Science at Georgetown University. David Lewis, Dina M. Siddiqi, Clinical Associate Professor, Liberal Studies, New York University, and the editor of this book, Kazuyo Minamide, Associate Professor, Department of English, Kirby College. Thank you for being with us today. Moving forward, I'd like to welcome the Managing Director of University Press Limited, Ms. Mahrukh Mohiuddin, to deliver her welcome speech.
Thank you, Shravanti. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending wherever you are. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this event online launching ceremony of Millennial Generation in Bangladesh. The title that we have published and handed over the copies to the editor about 2 months ago, but we're having the launch event today, and it's a real pleasure to have a really wonderful panel for friends and also authors of UPL, and maybe future authors of UPL. And I'm deeply grateful to all the panelists who have kindly agreed to make the time to read the book and also for agreeing to comment on the work today. Very briefly, the youth are, as it has been, explained in the book, the youth are very central to any society and to a state for their policy planning and for understanding the unique nature and dynamics of a societal structure. And this very unique compilation of work provides a very, an important glimpse of the segment of the Bangladeshi youth who have been maneuvering through various social and political changes and pursuing their aspirations in different manners. This provides a very necessary insight for everyone, I believe, starting from the state policymakers to business people who are, some of them who are market experts, and of course to academics, to politicians, to understand the aspirations and the journeys that these youths have made through their life experiences. And as Kazuyo has also aptly expressed in her introduction, that it is not possible to paint a picture with a broad brush of millennials living in perhaps in the West or in the urban settings and rural settings. So they all have their unique living experiences, and their experiences are or their aspirations are also shaped by the experiences they have throughout their life. And it's also very important to note that I don't think there has been much work done in this topic, and therefore this book is particularly of importance. And we are very proud to be the publisher of this important work. Lastly, I would just, I would probably come back towards the end of the conversation, but I just wanted to once again, congratulate the editor and each of the contributors for your work. And hopefully we will be able to reach this work and this will benefit, everybody that this is intended to benefit. And today we are really waiting to hear from the commentators, and I warmly welcome Dr. David Lewis, Dr. Tariq Omar Ali, and Dr. Dina Siddiqi for joining us, and we're keen to hear your comments on the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahrukh. We shall now move forward with lively, meaningful, and in-depth conversation and discussion of the book. So next we have Professor Kazuyo Minamide. We welcome you to introduce the book, Millennial Generation in Bangladesh, and initiate today's discussion. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for introducing me. And first of all, I would like to say that this is a great privilege for me and for the contributors of this book to have this discussion today. I am so grateful to my friend Mahrukh Mohiuddin and her team at the UPL for organizing this event and inviting highly distinguished scholars as our discussant, Professor Dina Siddiqi, Professor David Lewis, and Dr. Tariq Omar Ali. My deepest respect and thanks to them for their time and input. For me, this is the first step towards working with my international colleagues outside Japan. And it was indeed a big challenge for me at that outset. It took about 6 years to publish this book since we started the research project, Youth Migration and Their Cultural Formation in the Era of Economic Growth in Bangladesh, followed by another project, Youth Identity Politics and the Social Changes in Contemporary Bangladesh. Despite the ongoing pandemic-induced difficulties in every step, so many people helped me out, and I was always guided by their suggestions and advice. I cannot thank enough our contributors, whom I'm going to introduce later, our distinguished peer reviewers for each chapter, and the commentators who attended our symposium presenting our draft in February 2019. Since neither English nor Bangla is my native language, my friend Jackie Mamura, who is a professional English proofreader, also helped me a lot with editing. There are too many to express my gratitude to, of course, including my old friends in Jamalpur in Bangladesh. Now, this book is my favorite one among my publications, and having today's event is more than my dream. I feel that my door is now opened to another world. So now, let me introduce our book briefly. Our original focus in our research project was on youth in Bangladesh. Personally, since the year of 2000, I have been conducting field research with children who started to go to school in rural village, and I have been following their life tracks to date. Now they are in their late 20s to 30s, which is categorized in so-called youth. The category of youth indicates one of our life stages, and anyone would experience it in our lives. However, the lengths as well as the situation are individually far different. All of my friends who studied with me at primary school in Jamalpur have got married and have grown up children by now. Part of same-age youth in Bangladesh are studying at universities in the cities. Those university students subjectively recognize themselves as youth, while my friends in Jamalpur seldom do. In that way, the category of youth is a kind of subjective matter, and youthness is quite diversified in their situation, social class, and gender. In those discussions, our focal point of this book has been slightly shifted to the frame of the generation. The contemporary youth whom we discuss in this book were mainly born in the 1990s, the 1990s generation as mentioned in this book. As we can easily understand, the 1990s is one of the turning point for Bangladesh in social transformations, locally, nationally, and globally. Members of this 1990s generation in Bangladesh were born during the transition to democracy after military regimes, and part of them seems to be the children of Projomo Ekatro. The interlocutors from Jamalpur and elsewhere, the 1990s generation whose stories constituted this book, they grew up in a society directly influenced by neoliberal development approaches. They have been motivated to aspire for better lives, particularly through their educational experiences. However, the limited and diverse opportunities have forced them to struggle with uncertainty and resulting dissatisfaction. Their struggling settings represent the dilemmas of contemporary Bangladesh society in the global setting. Furthermore, their strategies to cope with the uncertainty they face differ significantly according to their social class and gender. Then again, more than being just coincident, they are also called millennials in the global context, having been strongly influenced by globalization, including digital technology. How can we pursue Bangladesh millennial generation globally? Needless to say, they cannot be described homogeneously. The influence of globalization reveals their different faces in many ways, and each has been struggling in its distinct settings. We believe the dynamics of the 1990th century have indeed indicated the dynamics of the society. In this book, each chapter describes the generation from a different perspective in pursuit of more fully understanding the generation as well as the society. We have 8 chapters, and each of them anthropologically describes different groups of them based on each author's fieldwork experiences. Chapter 1 and 2 mainly focus on those working in garment factories. Chapter 1 is by myself, entitled Seeking New Life, the Temporary Urbanization of Rural Migrating Youth. And chapter 2 is by Bessie Jennings here, titled Managing Urban Lives, Marriage and Employment Among Working Class Young Women in Dhaka. Chapter 3 and 4 investigate the links between higher education experience and career aspirations among the 1990s generation. Chapter 3 by Siddiqi Rahman here discuss career strategies of public university students. And chapter 4 by Humayun Kabir here focuses on the madrasa educated youth and discuss their negotiating careers within faith and identity. Then the chapter 5 and 6 deal with identity politics of urban youth. In chapter 5, Ainul Nahar, unfortunately, she cannot attend today. She focuses on young urban women attending halakas. And in chapter 6, Muhammadul Hassan Shumon examines the traditional Wanna festival organized by Mandi youth in Dhaka and discusses their ethnicity, ethnographic imagination, and identity construction. Then the chapter 7 and 8 focus on online strategies that youth use to transform their sociality. Chapter 7 by Moyan Jalal Chaudhry here, Charlotte, discussed the resistance sociality of the Shabak movement, the role of urban youth as online activists. And chapter 8 by Lotte Hawk here examine their online chat and discussion about cut piece entitled The Burning of Youth, Identity and Pleasure in Online Chat Rooms. Yet our book is limited in its coverage. For example, the lives of Bangladeshi migrant youth overseas away for their study or work are not covered. Or it could have covered more themes and issues such as the role of new media in shaping this generation. Still, we believe that the 1990s generation as a whole, the so-called millennial generation in Bangladesh, reflects contemporary Bangladesh, and they are the social transformers who are taking initiatives that will reshape Bangladesh's future in local and global settings. At the end of my introduction, I'd like to express my gratefulness to Professor Viran van Schender, who encouraged me to write my works in English and even invited me to a writing seminar in Myanmar. And Professor Dina M, who encouraged me to share my works with her in English or Bangla when I visited her in New York. I cannot appreciate enough my mentor, Professor Oshikawa, who has always guided me, supported me, and cheered me up always for more than 2 decades now. Before I stop, I'd like to acknowledge JSPS for their continuous funding for my work. I really thank you all who are present here and who are listening to this discussion from far and wide. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor, for the wonderful introduction to the book and its content. Moving forward, we'd like to welcome Professor Tariq Omar Ali to continue and further proceed the conversation and discussion of the book. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you especially to Mahrukh and to Professor Minamide for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be here. And I thank you for writing this book and putting it together. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. I cannot urge everyone enough to buy it. It's been great fun reading it over the last week. And I don't think I ever realized until I read this book just how significant the 90s generation are. This is a generation that comes of age in the age of garments and it's the age of enormous social transformation in Bangladesh. It is, I think we cannot express it enough. It's not just, it's the experiment in democracy, the continuing failing experiment in democracy. It is the age of mass urbanization. It is the age of garments and overseas migrant labor. It is the first generation in Bangladesh that grew up in universal primary education. I mean, that in itself is like mind-blowing, right? This is a hugely, this comes across so clearly how different and how hugely important this generation is to preceding generations. And there's a real argument to be made for it does it beautifully. It conveys that sense of newness, I think, very, very well. I have to say, though, it was recently pointed out to me that I'm not a youth. And I don't know if how many of us here actually belong to this generation. And it's a bit odd to speak for people in those ways. And I don't claim to. And I think the book is very careful about not doing what people of my generation and older generations do, which is ascribe a bunch of personality traits to millennials, those entitled, confident, brash youth of today. And I just want to read out the quote, because I feel like there's a real issue when people of our older people claim to speak for younger people, right? Because I think Professor Minamide addresses that really well in her introduction. I'll quote from you. Our book does not attempt to identify such personality traits of the generation, but rather pursues their socioeconomic and cultural commonalities and differences. And I want to thank you for that, because that's really, I think, important that we don't talk about this generation in those ways. I'm not going to be able to cover everything in the book and all the wonderful articles. I'll just pick out a few things that really, that I thought was very, very interesting. And I'll pick on the articles as I proceed. The first generation of urbanization. I thought that was the central theme of Professor Minamide's article, as well as Mahmoudul Shuman's wonderful article on Garo youth. How do Garo youth reinterpret what it means to be Garo in the new setting of Dhaka, under the new occupations of Dhaka? And I really I thought that was a theme of this first generation of moving from the village, living in a city, deciding what the rural-urban relations are. And this is something that is obviously happening much, much more broadly. And I really liked both the articles, right? We're talking about what we might consider the mainstream push of urbanization, garments workers, but also this very important different identities that are being worked at in Dhaka in relationship to each other through the Garos or celebrations that are restaged in urban settings with new understandings of what indigeneity means. That was fascinating to me. The second thing fascinating to me was, this is the neoliberal generation, the generation brought up under neoliberal ideas in a world shaped by neoliberalism. But how traditional, quote unquote, traditional concerns still seem to dominate. Bethany Jennings' article about the good husband. This is still with economic independence of women, we're still concerned about the good husband. It still matters. Old ideas of marriage, old ideas, I'm not sure what, newly imagined traditions still matter very much to livelihoods. From Siddiqi Rahman's article, the main career aspiration from what I got from that of public university students is a government job. Not the slick private sector jobs that are emerging, but the stability of government sector jobs. Again, we see things change, but perhaps not as much as we think they do, or older concerns still remain, or maybe I thought that was very interesting, how those things still remain. The articles in Islam were fascinating, the new ideas of Islam. Of course, what I get from that is, and this is true for many of the articles, is how important a global social media is. But also how, I'll just talk a little bit about Humayun Kabir's fabulous article on the Qawmi education system and Qawmi educated youth. The pursuit of a dual education, both a Qawmi education and a modern education, the attempt to mold a certain Islamic way of looking and dress and bodily kind of aesthetic with the desire for a modern career, the contradictions that arise from it. I thought it was very, very well written, very sympathetically written. And I know Nahar's wonderful article about more elite young women searching for new meanings of Islam that for me was very much a critique of sort of misogyny in popular Islam. They wanted a non-misogynistic understanding of Islam that they go looking for, perhaps inspired by looking at, listening to modern, quote unquote again, Islamic preachers on TV and YouTube, and then searching for these new meanings. Again, very fascinating and very much about newness, about new understandings that I really appreciated. I really, really enjoyed the two articles on the internet, essentially. Zalal Chaudhry's article on Shahbag is fascinating. I've never read such a detailed account of the origins of the Bangla blogosphere, how certain things go viral in the Bangla blogosphere, the trolling wars that preceded the Shahbag movement, the close watch that was kept on the ICT trials as they evolved, the transformation of a social media debate into an amorphous, ephemeral public event. And it was really a sort of a situated history of a space called the internet, which wasn't just sort of this amorphous space, but really solidified, I think, in ways that I found very, very illuminating. And similarly, it was great reading it alongside Lottie Hoek's article on the digitization of the cut piece and sort of the pornographic elements of the online sphere, the circulation, and this transformation of an artifact that is very pre-digital, right? The cut piece, the celluloid, into something that circulates, taking it out of its context of the small town cinema hall and the movies about class relations that are popular Bangla cinema, and putting it into the context of a diasporic international Bengali male community that shares porn was fascinating. And I think as I'm a historian by training, so I'm not really, but for me, Lottie Hoek's article traced a transition from the material to the online, which was great. All of this I sort of spoke at, randomly, I suppose, but what I want to convey is, for I think everyone reading this volume will raise questions, will raise thoughts. It will, even for those of us who are not millennials, perhaps not I don't want to say it will give us an insight into the millennial mind. I don't think it will, but it will help us think about a generation in very complex, in its complexities, in its diversities, and its various experiences, and to think about it creatively, imaginatively. And I think it's wonderful. Congratulations again. And I urge everyone to buy this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tariq Ali. So before we move ahead, we'd like to launch the book and therefore would like to request everyone to pose for a quick snap with the book in hand. I hope everyone has their book. Yes, all right.
Okay, I have a technical problem, don't I?
Everyone here.
There's some handy way to stop it being back to front, isn't there? But I don't know what it is.
All right, we did it.
We'll just press on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, we got the snap. All right. Moving on. Next, we have Professor David Lewis. Professor, I'm welcoming you to further proceed with the discussion of the book.
Thank you very much, Shrabanti, and I'm, hi to everybody. I was really honored to be asked to take part in this wonderful event today with friends old and new. So thank you, Kazuyo and Mahrukh, for this incredibly kind invitation. And I was incredibly excited too when the book arrived, not least by the shiny cover art, which is a beautiful piece of design, but also, of course, by the contents and the very exciting approach that you've all taken to this important, yet, as we've heard already, very much neglected subject. And it's such an essential one, I think, that it's we have to ask, why is there so little work of this kind around? What is it that social scientists and others are spending their time doing? Because this is the stuff that we should all be doing. This is incredibly important because it's trying to understand how society is changing and how society is projecting forward into the future through its young people. So I think it's really impressive that at Kazuyo, you've assembled such a diverse and skilled and high quality group of contributors to to populate this this theme. And also I think that this is one of the few edited books I've seen for a while where there is such a consistency of quality across all the chapters. I think we could take any one of these chapters and we could spend this launch just talking about it, questioning, thinking about it. So you've given us an incredibly difficult job, essentially, as I think Tariq said as well. I mean, we can't really comment on a book like this. There's too much going on. But just in general, I think I think it's a book that's offering a set of reflections, a very coherent set of reflections on the generation of millennials, Generation Y, who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, this 90s generation. And I think I like the way that it's been situated within this political turning point idea, the end of military rule and the ascendancy of global neoliberalism. And I think there's really such an important need to better understand the changing outlooks and values of the population. And I think many people have pointed out this, this gap. And I think, as Kazuyo tells us, this offers glimpses into a generation that has come to aspire to a better life in distinctive ways that are uniquely influenced by what she's calling developmentalism, which is an an interesting thing that I've been concerned with, for many years in the context of Bangladesh. So I found that, that aspect of it really important. And I think the introduction talks about how the members of this generation have been individualized to achieve success through their own motivations and aspirations, but also caught in a state of tension between the sort of declining relevance of localized aspirations and the expanding, people's integration into an expanding global imagination, and the dissatisfactions and tensions and contradictions that emerge from that process. And I think that's a very fruitful approach. And I like the idea of I think what you call struggle settings that are given rise to, by these structural and value tensions. So I think all of, the book offers a vast range of insights on an important set of themes. And I learned a huge amount that I don't know from reading these chapters. I learned a massive amount. So from Kazuyo's chapter 1, I learned that for many people coming from rural areas, the emergence of what she calls the non-agricultural mindset and the reality of urban life, that tension and that lack of satisfaction with urban life that needs to be managed, despite the fact that the agricultural mindset is already losing value. I think that tension I found really interesting and very thoughtful. From Bethany's chapter 2, the changes, the really complex and negotiated changes around marriage norms brought about by urbanization and industrialization, I thought was also really packed with insight. From Siddiqi Rahman's chapter 3, and this has actually already been mentioned, that's the danger, isn't it, of having a succession of people. We might pick up the same things, but I also picked up this idea that the attractiveness of a civil service public sector career remains incredibly strong, because I had very much sort of bought into the new conventional narrative of the increasing pull of private sector employment and the idea that there was declining interest in that BCS world. And I've also, written a little bit about that and bought into that idea. So that really made me think and made me see how that might have been exaggerated, and that understanding the range of pressures on young people, not just in terms of their own aspirations, but also the aspirations of people around them, immediate family, extended family, community. And I think that's another really interesting aspect of the book. So there's so much here and so little time to go into such a varied collection, and I'm not going to attempt to do that in any detail. You'll be glad to hear. I also enjoyed the insights of the social media dimensions of the Shahbag movement, and also the story of the Wana Festival and its role in Garo and identity formation, and also the many nuanced insights in the chapters dealing with religion. So just a few questions to end with, because I know that's what you wanted. And I'm afraid they're not particularly specific questions, but they're questions stroke observations. So one of them is about this disruption and transformation and the influence of neoliberalism that's outlined at the beginning. And I think perhaps it's possible to overstate, or at least to overgeneralize, what we're talking about here. So I was, for example, struck by the point made by Kazuyo in the introduction about education and the fact that, one might expect NGOs to be all over the place and involved in practically everything, but they're not. The point that NGOs are not allowed to run secondary schools, I thought was really interesting, restricting access to education. Our assumptions about neoliberalism might just as easily assume that this would be much less regulated. And I think, so therefore, I think it speaks to a kind of argument around varieties of neoliberalism, the idea that we have to be specific and nuanced in the way in which we think about that. The second point I want to raise is the issue around young people's frustrations, tensions. And I think one has to be careful to assume that there is much more of that around now than there was 20, 30 years ago. And I think what we have to explain there is not the fact that these things are new, but the fact that they've changed and that there are different drivers of these tensions and frustrations and different experiences amongst this generation as opposed to earlier generations. I'm thinking about the significance of this turning point, for different groups in terms of the direct, the direct experiences of these changes in terms of the experiences that people have, the opportunities that people have, but also the indirect influences in terms of the ideas that people are drawn to and the ideas that people are using as the basis for action. And then finally, I want to just close with a methodological point, which is that I think what I really liked about Kazuyo, your approach is this idea of essentially thinking through a life history framework. And I may well be wrong, but I haven't seen a huge amount of work on that and use of that kind of methodology. And I wanted to ask you whether you see yourself continuing to follow through this generation. Over here in the UK, there's quite a well-known documentary series called 7 Up, which you might have, some people might have come across, which is a really interesting long-term TV research project in which people who were born in the 60s, every 7 years, it goes back to those people. It was a diverse group, and they've continued to have been followed through more or less to their old age. And each of those individual lives offers really important insights into how society is changing and how ideas and values are changing. So anyway, I won't talk anymore because I think I might have gone over my 10 minutes, but I just wanted to congratulate everybody on this book. I think it's a really important work. And also, thanks to UPL for making it available and holding this event today. And I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Next, we have our last discussant, Professor Dina M. Siddiqi, to further proceed with the discussion of the book.
Thanks. It's hard to go after two very eloquent people, but I will try. First of all, I want to congratulate Mahrukh. It is such a pleasure to hold a book made in Bangladesh, shall we say, right? That is so impeccably produced inside and out. I'm not sure I entirely understand the cover. I looked at it a lot, but I think all that says is that it reflects my distance from the millennial generation, because there are lots of, I understand what is meant to say, but I also understand I'm not it, right? But it's really lovely. The point I want to make is that UPL is thriving thanks to your efforts, and it's really helping to broaden the scope of publishing in Bangladesh. And I really want to acknowledge that, Mahrukh. Okay. It is also an honor to help celebrate this wonderful book, edited by Kazuyo, which I encourage you all to buy and read. We've all been saying that every single chapter, I think, as David pointed out, every single chapter is superb. And that is hard to find anywhere in the world. There are always weak chapters. We just don't have any. I finally finished reading all the chapters last night. I learned so much from all of them. So what to do now that everybody said some of the things I was going to say? Right, mediation. I want to make a note on methodology. As an anthropologist, I was so pleased to pick this up. These are chapters based on long-term fieldwork, okay? Which means the essays are ethnographically nuanced, they're historically located, they're not just snapshots in time. They tell stories of individual lives and aspirations that don't fit necessarily into any predetermined cage, right? They are complicated, contradictory, and inconsistent. And these are the kinds of stories that get lost in so much of development research of the survey kind. And I understand surveys have their place. They give a very different kind of information, right? But the contradictions and inconsistencies that the stories point out reveal so much about the dynamics of power and resistance. And they really allow us also to move away from middle class or dominant development discourses of progress and modernity, which are also middle class nationalist discourses of progress and modernity. In fact, I see all of these chapters pushing back in different ways against that. And I really appreciate the not instrumentalizing of youth that the larger framing does, because in post-colonial states like Bangladesh, we talk about taking advantage of the so-called youth dividend, et cetera, and I'm sure there's a place for that. But as an academic, I am much more interested in getting to the complexities and the textures of everyday life and what they can also teach us, right? So I see some key themes in the book. One of them, again, I think is about undoing and demystifying a set of enduring tropes and binaries, demonstrating the porosity of boundaries. And the chapters on Islam do this the most, but I think others do. That's one. The second thing is, it's drawing the reader's attention to the relationship, the mutually constitutive relationship between the global, however you define it, and the national or regional or local. And it's pushing us to think about scales. Okay, and we see this in the article most specifically on Mandi and cut pieces, a little bit on Shabak, but it's all asking us to think about what globalization means in a variety of contexts inside the national space of Bangladesh. And it really reminded me, thinking about these individuals, reading about these individuals, about the mediated nature of contemporary aspirations. Perhaps they have always been mediated, and there's a bigger debate that Arjuna Padra and others have about the opening up of imaginations under conditions of globalization, right? That's there, and you see it in the different chapters in different ways. And then finally, I think, well, two more things. There's a manifestation, very different, specific contextual manifestations of class sensibility that you see in the production of distinction. And my former student, Apollo's chapter on education shows that in different ways. About who, I'm not entirely sure that I actually know a lot of people who are desperate to get into corporate jobs, but they might be of a slightly different class status than others, who really, for whose families getting those government jobs is absolutely critical, right? For them, making those connections producing their own cultural capital and social capital, which other people whose families already have through kinship and social networks who don't need, they don't need to worry about making those cultural capital, those forms of cultural capital work for them. They're the ones I think that Paulo's paper is talking about, and they're very important. I think all of this is calling for us to be cognizant of the incredible heterogeneity in this category that we are calling youth. It's a very capacious category, the way it's being used here, which is fine. But I think it's just there are no uniform understandings, and there shouldn't be, which is what the book does. And lastly, I think, especially the chapter on the Mandi and Lata's chapter, really force us to think about the nation state racializing, othering, and what it means under conditions of globalization. I will talk, of course, being me, about the first two chapters the most, because which are on the garment industry, okay? And again, what I saw, and I love this term, the age of garments. I'm totally stealing this from you. The age of garments, okay, I'm with it, okay. But what I saw in those two chapters is a rupturing or an unsettling of very taken for granted discourses around empowerment and development and growth that are associated with the garment industry. I mean, yes, the gendered expectations are different, but I think the figure of the garment worker, especially the male garment worker, who, by the way, is usually not the subject of study or definitely not considered youth. So I'm very glad you did that. You included the two male voices there. The fact that the garment industry is not a destination a final destination, as many people would assume, but it's a temporary thing, right? It's garments are, especially for men, it really reminded me of something you pointed out in the introduction of the notion of time pass, Craig Jeffrey's notion of time pass and waiting. They're waiting for something else. And actually that chapter made me really sad because it shows it's the frustration and tensions I think David also mentioned. There are ways in which it opened up all kinds of questions about development and developmentalism and where are we? What are these promises? What does it mean? It also shows the bleeding of these categories of urban and rural into each other. The urban and the rural are in a direct connection. People go work in the garment factories that come back and then go again when they need money. It's a very interesting kind of, it's very different from what we've thought of. And again, with chapter 2, with Bethany's chapter, garment work, female subjectivity, we are used to thinking is so shaped by the conditions of work. Garment work is one among many other considerations that produces these women's subjectivities as Bangladeshi women. Okay, I will try. I'm on 9 minutes. I have a lot more to say about the chapters on Islam, but I think they've been said. But I want to say it's really calling us, the reader, to reevaluate our assumptions regarding who goes to madrasas, or women who take there's, it's so, I'm really glad those two chapters are out there, okay? I want to say, I have a lot more to say about the other chapters, but maybe...
Please continue.
Continue?
I'm
okay, I'll try, okay. All right.
From the others, so, please don't hold back because I don't think
okay, just a few things. All right. The chapter on Mandi, I'm sorry Lata's gone, but the relationship, I was fascinated by the way in which, it was very important that in the chapter on the Mandi, the relationship between UN ideas of indigenous, which get translated as Adivashi, have been appropriately made, perhaps even vernacularized by Mandi youth. But what is so interesting to me, and this is one of the questions I had, is it's striking that Christianity, rather than the Bangladeshi state, and its actual, its land grabbing or everything becomes the target of resistance. And here is where I want to connect all of this to neoliberalism with Lata's argument too. I think there's a kind of identity politics that neoliberal values promote rather than class sensibility. And here you see, or this is, I think, I was thinking of something Rehnum Ahmed wrote about identity politics and the neoliberal jamana, as she calls it. And it was really reminding me of that. How is it, what becomes the inflection points for resistance? And this takes me to something that Lata's article brings up. How do questions of nationality trump questions of class? With the shift from cut pieces going from movie theaters, so the context of consumption is different, to online consumption. Suddenly, so you don't talk about class becomes not relevant. It's the desire to fix Bangladeshi bodies, or bodies out there, the bodies under the male gaze, as Bangladeshi or not. It's really interesting. I think these certain kinds of the racializing, othering, bolstering up national identity really sits well with the larger global neoliberal kind of discourse. I don't know more about any of these cases to say more about it, but it is really, worth thinking about. And finally, about class, I had a question about class that I'm forgetting, and it had to do with the Shabab chapter. I guess I was thinking this is a question about the Shabab chapter, about class, and where the politics of populism come in. And can we talk about populism and youth, and where does a Muslim populism come in? I'm just throwing this out for you. And finally, just about class, this is something perhaps not about the youth. How is it that we don't have, you talk about class formation, I think, in the introduction, but what leads to the formation of a shared sense of class identity? I don't think there is anything in all of these people. Even do crises like Rana Plaza, the Rana Plaza collapse, lead to a sense of shared identity, or common grievances from the garment workers that you are telling me about? It doesn't seem like that's about to happen. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We have come to the end of the book discussion, but before we conclude our event, we had a couple of questions from Professor David that Professor Minamide would like to answer. Professor Minamide, to you.
Okay, and thank you so much. And it's so fruitful, and I really appreciate all the comments, and this is maybe beyond my capacity to answer all questions, but I really learned a lot from their comments, and maybe I can answer the question technically to David about the methodology. And I really, you are right. I was really inspired by the 7-Up program in the UK, and I also make the films about the children and their life courses, and so this is one of the way I do, and as a long-term field work, as Dina said also. And I take the advantage as a foreigner to do field work in the area. I was not good at talking in Bangla when I started my field work, and I tried to study with children at the primary school at the grade 4. And so they were actually my classmate, and I dropped out from the class 5 in Bangladesh. But still, they are my friends, and they guided me actually. And so in that way, I follow them up, but not objectively, I see, because I really share their struggles. Of course, the context is different, living and working in Japan and working in Bangladesh for them. But I feel the empathy or the sympathy with them, how struggle. I feel struggle also in Japan when I work here. And the similar neoliberal impact I can see. And yeah, and particularly when I teach students here in Japan, they are also the same generation, and they also have some the similar neoliberal impact. So in that way, this book is also, as Mahrukh said, not only about the case of Bangladesh, but also in the global context, and what we share between in Bangladesh in other societies. We can also, although we didn't discuss it in the book, yeah, but I hope the readers even outside Bangladesh can be inspired to think about the similar the impact and what is the uniqueness of Bangladesh society and what in common under the neoliberal the situation. That's is also the point I would like to reflect. Okay, so
thank you, Professor Minamide. Are there any more questions for her, perhaps?
Dina had some questions, so maybe the contributors, some of the contributors can also comment. Ahmadul Shimon, Bethany Jennings, Humayun Kabir, and Dr. Jalal Chaudhry.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to go first, I guess, can volunteer.
Okay. I think one of the questions that Dina asked was how Christianity is the antagonist in this particular case. I mean, that was in the particular paper, in that particular chapter, I was trying to argue that generally in the rights discourse, you tend to have the state as the antagonist, but there were, very different sort of responses to rights discourse as well. So I was, interested in that, okay, it's not a uniform discourse where it is only the state. So maybe the state and viewing the state as an antagonist when it comes to this question of recognition of Adivasi. So there were other responses, and responses which were not usually discussed in rights discourse. So that is one thing that I was really trying to argue in that particular chapter. But generally, there's just one point. I mean, it's not related to my chapter. I mean, this question about public university students willing to go to have this opportunity in the government sector. I mean, what has happened in the last 2 decades is that there has been a shift in terms of demography when we talk about public universities. So here, I mean, most of us, I mean, the Bangladeshi graduates are from public universities, and also coming from a middle class background. But things have really changed in the last 1 decade. And because of that, and the changes, I mean, there has been a massification of education in Bangladesh. So what has happened is that now a lot of rural students are also coming, students from rural background are also coming in public universities. And that perfectly fits with the argument that Professor Siddiqi Rahman was making, that because of that lack of social capital, these students were keen to, access these important resources. And also there has been change in government structure as well in terms of pay and all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, no, I mean, I really don't know. I mean, it's not a formal conference, or no, it's not a proper response to the paper, but I would just like to thank all the 3 speakers for your wonderful comment. And I also would like to thank Kazuo for actually bringing us all together. I mean, this is all her, I mean, I give full credit to her. It is her idea that we all, people working in different areas, and in some cases, this is just a coincidence that we are here. So, I mean, it is Kazuo's book, and it is her project, and she did it very well. And I'm very proud to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Can I go next? Yeah. Thank you. I'll take actually first Dinapa's question, a hint. Incidentally, I'm sitting at your room, Dinapa, at Bragg.
I thought it looked very familiar. I have taught Schumann for 6 years at a private university. I have a good sense of, at least for those 6 years, who the students were. Yeah.
So,
oh well.
Very instantly nice. So one of the key factors is the populist genre that you were mentioning, or that indication, is quite right. At the same time, one of the key factors was the Islamist or grassroots Islamist forces are there, even though urban-based, privileged, internet-educated, early resistance that grew. These were the generation, as such a population, were really saying before that we hate politics across the urban population. So it kind of depoliticized already. So within that, social media acted as a platform first, and then a space for what we can say a virtual adda, then turns into offline spaces, and the transactions goes on. However, as you have rightly pointed out, as we can see over the projection of 1 month, the space that they have created through Ganojagran Moncho and the intervention of the established mainstream political parties, veteran political parties, really didn't push it to stay even for a second, right? However, one of the key positive side is on and off, we can see the 2018 road safety movement. Yeah. Students are using, again, social media platforms, having the replicability based on the urban spaces was there. So from the internal experience, interlocutors, is that for the 3 days, we often fall in the trap of justice. We almost forget the justice discourse in the Shahbag movement. We often, because of the next step was so faces in that sense, or the demanding was so complicated, we often forget that the past 3 days was the most surviving part, when they are not yet organized at such matter. We cannot find it centralized, that platform, 8 February particularly, because the in-depth interviews or participant observation, I saw that people are saying, I'm from BNP, I'm from that part, but I'm still here. Why you're here? I've been a corporate official, but I'm here because I felt like being here. So I think one of the biggest trap of the history making of Shahbag as well is not taking into account these diversified narratives. Exactly. And that is the trap. And that is why I think ethnographic description would give us that Shahbag is so multidimensional, so layered, that we are only scratching. So that is one of the, and I think this is the political aspect that we have been, and then I'll move forward to, I think, Professor Lewis' indication is such, is that, of course, the movements, resistance are not focused on this generation, or the agitation are only for this generation. People have been resisting since in many years in Bangladesh. So in every case, your writings are already there. One of the key factors or the contributors, as I'm arguing, that social media is not only a media, but I'm arguing at the same time, it is creating a society, which is combination of online and offline society. So it creates a certain sense of belonging, certain sense of fluidity. Neoliberal impetus are like blistering around. People are self-promoting. And at the same time, if we think at that in a way that, okay, how about people who are 40 to 75? what is their presence in social media, how they take it, right? So Liz give us a hint. So it is not necessarily that they are devoid of. So first of all, it's a very localized context. Second, it is also a very complex one, because the urban population, I found that they found their newfound land of expressing themselves, not the same time like restricting themselves in the social media. So they are kind of reorganizing themselves. So now we categorize that TikTok, Instagram are for the real young ones. Then Facebooks are at 21, 24 to 35, 40, and blog and those things are much older. So it depends on the context. However, one key part is that being the idea of Dina is that the populist formation is a deliberate contribution of two parties. And I'll conclude there. The medium is in itself is pushing to be kind of apolitical. So it's a neoliberal way of making it. So all of your anger, anguish, let it done. Give me a count. The more you are interacting, the more I'll be enriched. Until to that point that it becomes against agenda, one of the things, and the regime as in itself. Because this hybrid space is much easier to control. We shouldn't be forgetting, we are just implementing ICT law, and if there, so the transcending capacity that has been increased. When we were thinking this is the democratic space just 5 years back or 10 years back, this is the new public sphere. No, so it becomes the most surveilled, controlled space there. And if you can see clearly that the transcending capacity, you make a post, comment, and then and there, your offline movement, mobility, everything is cut down. Think about like 15 years back, if you are having an adda in other places, was it that simple? Not that simple. So sociality has been manipulated as well. So that would be my humble answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Humayun Kabir, do you want to address Dina's question?
Yeah, I think I try to focus on that as well. So both of the cases I try to answer. So Dina, any other question that you have, populism or anything?
I thought I would ask also Humayun Kabir, just because he's studying the Qawmi Madrasa. That's, what people would think, in the same question from a different, from apparently the different populace, although it's very clear that there were people in Shabak who were also, as you're saying, sympathetic also to perhaps some of the Fazad. Anyway, I'll stop.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sort of, for a long explanation. To some extent, it's also related to the ideas of resistance. I mean, we tend to think about the Qawmi Madrasa educated youth under some assumptions, which is, some sort of radicalized or potential radicalizations of those youth might be possible. And there's a discourse or a rhetoric in Bangladesh, even, the secular, liberal, so-called progressive intelligentsia, they continue to label those, youth or those sectors that they are potential threat to secular democracy or whatever. So in these piece, I mean, what I try to argue from the perspectives of identity and also how they negotiate with the existing social structure that is very much unequal to them in both sense, in symbolic sense and also in real sense, I mean, in more tangible sense, because those youth who are graduating from the Qawmi, they don't have those sorts of credentials recognized by the state to get a job. So they have to compete also. So this is one thing. Another thing is they understand, or they kind of, perceive that they are being perceived by the larger society as that kind of hujur. So the meaning of hujur, or meaning of those words, they feel like that they are not able to fight or not able to get a job in a corporations or any private sector, because their embodiment of Islam is different. They have beard, they have those Punjabis, topis, and all these things. So how to having those sorts of visibility of Islam that they adapt through some sort of embodiment, and how to negotiate with the existing social structure. That is, I try to argue that one is that they actually to some extent resist to the structure, and they do have a double degree program. I mean, even having those, and also they create the new religious avenues for them for some sort of vocations. And most of all, they have their own religious kind of economy where they do work, and at the same time they're expanding. So this is also a response in a sense to our negotiations or strategy in a sense to the existing structure, but also at the same time as some sort of self-perceptions that they are youth, they are of course Bangladeshi youths, but they are being considered by others not the not so-called modern having shirt print and all these things. So this is the processes which is going on. And also I highlighted one idea, which is the vernacularizations of Islamic knowledge that's they contribute to. So so the notion of Muslimness even within madrasa graduates differ in terms of whether it's contested. It's not about learning from madrasa. It's learning about how you embody Islam with you. Or if that's important. That debate is still going on.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Siddiqur Rahman, Dr. Siddiqur Rahman, if you wanted to.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Dinapa, good to see you after a long.
I think we met in Tokyo with Kazuyo last time.
Yeah. Last time.
Yeah.
Good to see you. And thank you so much for everyone for making all these wonderful comments about the book. I just will take 1 minute to respond to Professor Davis' comments about his hunch that maybe he's wrong. I just wanted to make sure that maybe he's right too, because one thing is very important to remember, that the BCS jobs is very limited. So the number of graduates that graduate every year, government jobs in no way can accommodate all these graduates. So what I wanted to say that maybe is their preferences. In the event that they can secure it, they definitely go for the private sectors. But the kind of discomfort they mention about the private sector is kind of different than the private sector we often think in the West, where the professional know-how, skills, and all the things that sort of your quality to go to the ladder of the, sometimes you can argue that maybe there is some sort of nepotism, but I guess in Bangladeshi neoliberalism, that what we learn, that there are strong influence of the kinship system and the bias for the kings for all the big posts in the directors and all that. So positions and all that. So some of the respondents mentioned that maybe it's very unstable to secure private sector jobs. They can be guaranteed. So they have a perception that if you are not a close relatives of them, it's hard to keep even their jobs, even if they get into, but they can't get into the top of the thing. In terms of the garments industry, Dinapa, in front of you, you know better than me that all of the top level management jobs are secured by foreigners, especially by the Indians and Sri Lankans. So they think like, okay, maybe I can be the line manager or the manager at best. So some of the graduates, and it has attached to the social status. I don't know, for some reason. University graduates, they don't find it's very socially respectable to work for the garments industry. So that's another important thing that I realized.
That's right.
Second thing, and when I talk about the section in alternative career, because a lot of the students are these days trying to leave the country as an immigrant. There are different countries who have that immigration packages, and I mean I myself write a lot of recommendation letter for my students, but all of a sudden for the last 5 years, the number of recommendation letters I'm writing is like, here's the jump. So that's one thing that I realized. And the most interesting thing that I wanted to mention here, like that's kind of an like, you know, like significantly like strike me in one like, you know, incident. I can tell you that one of my students, who is a female student, secured her scholarship in the US and requested me that if I can request another professor in Canada. Doesn't she wants to? I said, why do you want to go there? Because you are fully funded in the US. She said, my husband told me that being an like a permanent resident in the US would be very difficult for me under Trump administration, but it is easier to get the peer and permanent residence in Canada. So can you like talk to the professor you know in Canada? So that's the thing that I was thinking, oh my goodness, that these people are going to or going abroad not to come back, and they're saying it in front of like me that I'm going to.
Yeah, you're breaking up, unfortunately. Yeah,
that's the kind of thing that I feel like the changes that I see in these days, and also the new entrepreneurship. Like everybody wants to be the like, you know, wants to open their own business, wants to be like the global mindset that they don't want to work for anybody. That the kind of thing that we see these days. They're also like, you know, touching up on the mindset of the private, like, you know, university graduates as well. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much, Professor David, and everyone who commented on the chapter. And I would like to thank you, Professor Kazuyo Minamide, for this wonderful, like, you know, work that she did over the years with us. With the Department of Anthropology and all the other contributors. It's good to see you, everyone. Human Bhai and Sharot and Shumon and Mahrukh Mohiuddin from the UPL. You did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for all your hard work. Thank you, and your team as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you, and we have come to the end of the Q&A session. A big thank you to the guests and discussants for being with us today. Moving forward, I'd like to call upon Ms. Mahrukh Mohiuddin of UPL to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. I don't think I want to do a formal vote of thanks, but I think it's been really a treat listening to each one of you, and, you know, the panelists. You were absolutely, you know, very encouraging, and you know, listening to Dina is like, you know, listening to music at times, because, you know, it really well, and I think, you know, thank you all for you know, supporting this project in the way that it deserved, because I think, you know, I want to especially say that Kazuyo really allowed us to do our job. So I think, you know, the production came out the way it did because, you know, there was so much, you know, respect and liberty for us in doing what we needed to do. And I think that, you know, in that way, I felt that it was you know, in a way, in many ways, it was like an ideal publishing experience, you know, in getting this book out. So I really congratulate Kazuyo for doing that. And I know that, you know, she got all the support from the contributors and the reviewers in the process. So, you know, it's always a teamwork. So, you know, there's a lot of other, you know, people at the backstage, you know, who worked. The cover designer Shoboshatsi Hajra did a wonderful job, and you know, the production team and the editors at our end, the editing team, Shravanti herself was very much involved. So so you know, it was a pleasure all the way through getting this book out. And wonderful to have David, who, you know, who was published from UPL many years back. You know, we feel that you're part of our family. Dina Siddiqi, of course, and Tariq has left, sadly, but, you know, he's also, you know, he makes us very proud with the work he's doing. So, and this particular work, you know, like Kazuyo said also in her introduction, that it really is like a beginning of looking into these issues. And as David said, I also felt the same way that, why aren't everybody, focusing on the emerging generation and, their aspirations and what needs to be done. So as Dr. Siddiqur Rahman said, that, there is this aspiration to move away from the country. So what can we do to make a reversal of that trend? And I think we're already there at that point where we're losing many of our resources, many of our skilled resources. So this is something that we have been discussing with a lot of desperation in the recent times, but there doesn't seem to be much happening in terms of, policy change or political change, if I may say so. So I think moving away from just the academic discourse, if we can engage, also in Bangla language, I request each one of the contributors, except for maybe Bethany and Kazuyo, I'm sure you will be able to also, we can translate your work into Bangla, but I think it's important to have these conversations in Bangla, in outside of just the academic space, for more sort of engaging and application-based conversations. So congratulations to everyone, and once again, thank you so much to Dina, Abad, David, and Tariq for your really genuine and heartfelt encouragements and questions and comments. So I think we will end with that, and we welcome you all to UPL and to be in touch with us. And if we can, do anything further in terms of, publishing your work or, having these conversations in future, our doors are open. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mahrukh.
Especially Mahrukh.
Thank you, Mahrukh. And if I could just say just say one last thing, Mahrukh, which is to say that I think your dad would have been, proud of this book, because you've really kept the tradition, going. And I think this is exactly the kind of work that he would have really liked.
I was just thinking that when
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate Mahrukh and the UPL, and I really wanted to publish the book about Bangladesh in Bangladesh, because from outside Bangladesh or the inside Bangladesh, of course, the UPL book can be read, and this is very important. The UPL is there and publish about the books about Bangladesh society and in abroad. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you all. I think we'll end the live, and if people want to stay on for further adda.
Unfortunately,
so
it's a Friday full of meetings. I would love to stay on, but I will make another 2-hour journey to UPL next time I'm in Dhaka.
Please do. Hopefully it won't be that long anymore.
Hopefully not.
I didn't hear from you today, but maybe another opportunity. Bethany also left, I think. So সবার সাথে আসলে আলাপ হয়নি, মানে আপনারা ঢাকায় আসলে অবশ্যই ইউপিএল এ আসবেন, যোগাযোগ করবেন। ডক্টর জালাল চৌধুরী, আপনি তো আছেন বোধহয় ঢাকাতেই, so please come by and meet us.
আমি তো ঢাকাতে আছি,
হ্যাঁ নিশ্চয়ই আসবো। থ্যাংক ইউ। আসতে চাই আসলে।
আপনাদের সবাইকে আবারও অভিনন্দন।
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being a part of this event.
Sravanti, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much.
So we'll be ending the live soon. Thank you for joining today. It was wonderful having this discussion.
Thank you.
Domo arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you, Minamide. Thank you for your hard